the embassies in Washington, D.C., but then also with the missions in Geneva and New York. And then at the consideration, they had viewing parties where they actually watched the live webcast and would tweet the entire time through that as well. In the end, we have, you can see here, 53 videos. So no reason to show all those. And then if Eve goes back to the video, let's see if we can. No, it's the next one. Let's see. Yeah, so here's our last phase in the adoption was when a really bad thing is after the actual review, it's hard to get people to maintain interest in it. And if you've ever seen the recommendations, they read very boringly. So what we did do was come up with a campaign, as you can see here, saying steps of what you can do. So select a UPR recommendation you believe the U.S. government should officially accept. We told them what to do with it then. What type, then you write or type the number of the recommendation on the attached adopt a UPR recommendation sheet along with a short message. And then we gave them handles for Twitter. And you can see some of the examples here. And with that example, we had the first one here. You have Ryan Kaminsky, and he tweeted out regarding LGBTQIA rights. And the interesting thing with his tweet, the ambassador to the Human Rights Council for the United States actually responded. So if that ever pulls up, you'll be able to see that interaction, how we use Twitter in that process. There we go. Now we're moving. But then what everybody would do would be taking, in a way, their, we called them selfies with substance. So it's not to make fun of everybody who loves taking pictures in this room, of course. Didn't know that would be your passion. But the point is, if you're going to take pictures, then you have a sign with your message on there. So if you go down a little bit, if it ever loads up, there you see Keith Harper, our current ambassador. So he responds back, the U.S. is committed to secure equal rights for LGBT persons at home and abroad. So for that person, he's just one person who sends out a tweet with a picture that's not showing up. And he's like, the ambassador to the UN for the United States actually responded to just my tweet. So it's kind of a way to get him excited. Also, it also showed officials, we actually know recommendation numbers, that someone's actually following them and holding them accountable. So that got a lot of people interested. Maybe we'll just pull up the next one underneath over there. Yeah. So we'll see if it takes a little bit. And then the last thing I'll show is on the actual day of the adoption, which was in September, we actually, they have great pictures there. A fun-looking dynamic duo of two people in that picture. That's not showing up right now. But at the adoption, we had a tweet-a-thon so that we actually had, on the day, everyone sending out different tweets regarding what issues they care about the most. So I'll just pull up that last video. There you go. And there you can see them with their sign of. And then we have. I don't know if you can you make it bigger? Okay, there we go. We make it bigger. So you could see that. We made these signs so you actually could just write in the recommendation number. The United States had a record 343 recommendations, 343. So these young women got all the way up to recommendations 236 and 237 regarding justice. So then their classmates, their students, everyone started tweeting and sending in their recommendations. But more importantly, it got people to read the recommendations. Because once you do all that work and it's in this UN document, very few people are, I can't wait to devour and go through that document and see if my issue's there. So it was a great way to get people to read the document, but then also generate and put pressure on the government at the same time to accept certain recommendations that we know they didn't want to. And we go back to, was just one more email that I sent you, and then that's it. And then here you can, yeah, it was the last one. So we came up with a social media day of action, and then we just sent it out to everyone to say on September 24, 2015, the Human Rights Committee will adopt the U.S. responses for a day of action on social media. So everyone was on social media. The hashtags were UPR, shame on, U.S. government, and action not lip surface. So those were the ones that were able to then trend and to organize and coordinate. So these are just some small examples of what we try to do with social media in all 5 phases to make sure that people were aware and engaged in participating with the process, as opposed to just being academics and lawyers and a circle of activists that normally do participate in this way. So these are just some of those things, Yves.
Merci Josh. Merci Josh pour cette présentation. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions, des commentaires que vous devriez y avoir des précisions? Désolé pour les petits problèmes techniques inhérents à ce genre de démonstration. J'espère que vous avez pu quand même entendre correctement la présentation du premier film. Donc là, on a clairement, c'est l'action qui a eu lieu ces derniers mois pour l'examen périodique universel. Est-ce que certains auraient des commentaires ou des questions sur comment est-ce qu'ils se sont organisés ou quels ont été les effets? Moi, j'en aurais un quand même qui est de savoir est-ce que l'ensemble de ces différentes actions, est-ce que vous avez pu mesurer un impact sur le résultat final, par exemple dans les recommandations? Est-ce que ça donnait l'impression que, par exemple, certains États ont pris conscience de cette demande venant de la société nord-américaine et ont du coup mieux formulé leurs recommandations, y ont prêté plus d'attention? Je dirais, est-ce que ça a réussi à atteindre d'une certaine manière le débat qui a lieu à Genève?
I mean, that was probably the best thing, is that for a person in the U.S. to send out one tweet and get a tweet back from the ambassador, they were like, I can't believe they're actually following. So that was one thing where then people are starting to be like, we can get a response. But the other side was, we did put certain issues at the forefront, such as economic, social, and cultural rights, and we did get the response that we wanted in certain areas. So on the right to housing was one that we pushed for. That was one of the videos. They had local ordinances that criminalized homelessness, and that if you did any action like sleep on a bench or go to the bathroom outside because you didn't have a home, there'd be criminal actions. So based on our UPR actions, it's called HUD, Housing Urban Development, as well as Department of Justice, wrote amicus curiae briefs and put pressure on the local authorities, and they actually then changed the laws. So homeless people were being criminalized for their basic actions. And more importantly, on their survey that Housing Urban Development sends out that locals can apply for funding, it asked them if they have those kind of laws, and those people wouldn't get funds from the feds. So we used different groups and those were working groups on the right to housing to push that and bring those down. So that was directly with that person. His name is Eric Tars, and he made videos everywhere he went. So he'd be like, I'm in Geneva, I'm going into the Human Rights Council, we're doing this is my side event. And so he actually worked, every time he did something, he sent it to HUD, and then they had a conversation about what could HUD do. So one of the important parts for Eric was he would actually find the solution for them and say, you need to do this, you have to do that. And now there's actually a close partnership that never existed before, and he actually knows who's responsible for national policies on housing, and they just never had that idea before the UPR. But he followed up on the first UPR and worked the entire 4 years in between to then get these results by the second one. So there's a couple of examples where we actually did get, and it was the people using more social media and talking more with people that had more of an impact. And also just the human story, to be able to see people and see what happens to people is much more compelling than a 2-page document. So we think the videos worked really well that way as well. Okay, I didn't know fish was that heavy.
Il y a
I
plusieurs.
saw your...
Il y a deux questions ici.
Yep.
Merci, Monsieur Cooper. Moi, j'ai bien aimé votre stratégie que vous avez utilisée pour un peu faire comprendre à la population nord-américaine qu'il existe des instruments de protection des droits humains, notamment la liberté de vivre, d'avoir une vie décente, non aux bavures policières, etc. Et ma question est que tout au début de votre travail, quelles sont les difficultés que vous avez rencontrées? Peut-être l'approche que vous avez eue, est-ce que les populations l'ont très bien perçue ou bien est-ce que vous avez été victime de pression ou bien comment vous avez fait un peu pour mettre en place un climat de confiance entre vous et la population et aussi par rapport aux autorités administratives, est-ce que vous n'avez pas rencontré de difficultés pour un peu mettre en place cette stratégie de communication? Je vous remercie.
Gaston?
Merci beaucoup, c'est Gaston de la RDC. J'ai été intéressé par l'aspect de forme moderne d'esclavage. Et là, c'est au niveau de travail forcé. Je me demande, parce que mon organisation travaille sur les formes modernes d'esclavage autour des sites miniers en province du Nord Kivu, avec bien sûr un partenaire américain, Free the Slaves. Alors, j'aimerais demander comment est-ce que la communauté elle-même a considéré que tous ces traitements constituaient les formes, en fait, nous, chez nous, les appelons formes modernes d'esclavage. Comment est-ce que les communautés ont arrivé à constater que c'était vraiment de l'esclavage lors de leur service? Et combien de temps ça vous a pris pour que les communautés prennent conscience? Merci.
Merci en tout cas de ce film-là, et que c'est instructif encore. On a encore des éléments, de nouveaux éléments qui nous aident dans l'appréciation des travaux que nous faisons. Et, vu la diversité de la population américaine et que l'immensité aussi du territoire, comment vous avez abordé ces questions? Quelles sont les difficultés que vous avez eues? Est-ce que le travail que vous avez fait, c'est un travail qui était focalisé seulement sur certains États, ou bien est-ce que vous avez pu couvrir en tout cas toute l'étendue du territoire?
One more in the back.
Oui, merci. Je viens de ce film par rapport à l'esclavage. Au Congo-Brazzaville, il y a la loi concernant les peuples autochtones. La loi numéro 5, c'était adoptée en 2011. Promotion et protection des droits des peuples autochtones. Bien qu'il y ait la loi, mais jusqu'à aujourd'hui, la loi n'est pas mise en œuvre. Les femmes autochtones sont toujours marginalisées, esclavagisme. Maintenant, concernant ça, j'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce qu'il faut-il faire pour ça.
Paul, one last one, I think.
Thank you, Jose, for a presentation. I think whatever you have presented, the communication strategy, it is very applicable for developed countries where you have accessibility to those facilities. But for a country like Nepal, where a large population lives in rural area, and still even for the urban population where we do have access to, as Prakash earlier said, the social media has been very popular and people are using it, but the reality is a country where there is a load shedding of almost 16 hours. It's not accessible. So apart from these modern new technologies, what as per your opinion or experience, what could be the other alternative communication strategy where you do not have this kind of facilities? Thank you.
Okay. So the first question was a good one on...
One more.
Oh, one more. Okay.
One of the tasks that I have in my organization is writing and publishing articles concerning human rights. So the media in Moldova is controlled, political controlled, and when you are trying to get information, it's very difficult to get a correct one. So my question is, when I'm writing an article, how much space do I have, so where am I allowed to have for my own critical review? Like when I'm treating human rights, even it doesn't matter what field, but how many space an author have for their own vision about the subject? Thank you.
Okay. So I was going to try to pull something up on that, but I'll start with local community and then see if I can find the answer to that one through an example. So for local community, one of the most important things on how we always operated was, even though we had a loose network, we worked with groups in each community, and each community sort of represented themselves. So we also made it that you could start a working group anytime you want, but the idea was always to try to work together. So we end up having around 24 working groups each review. And so based on themes and issues that they focused on, they actually all worked together based on what they wanted to work on. So we didn't have a sort of a Washington, D.C. or a New York group come in. We actually, people would talk what's going on in their community, and that's why we asked people to make movies, in the sense that most community people, if you go into the community like, we're going to do the UPR and let's write a 5-page document. They're like, what the hell are you talking about? The police are beating me up. And you're like, oh, okay. It just wouldn't work. You wouldn't have trust. So when we went in, it was like, we looked at what people did. We did spoken word. So you don't have to have social media. It was like spoken word. We had poetry. We worked with each culture. So with indigenous peoples, we would have traditional meetings and go to traditional meetings and work that way. So it was working with how the community already operated, not what we thought. And our rule was, if what they were working on, UPR would distract them, we wouldn't ask them to be involved. But we could always show that, oh, your campaign is entirely what's needed and what's important, and this is what could be done next. So that's kind of how we organize with local community. So, I mean, it is tough in the sense that you have to build trust, but if you look at almost any community, unfortunately, UPR is a great tool that we actually really started to tell the lawyers they couldn't have as much ego, that they were actually true partners. And we had great stories then that we heard from the Civil Rights time, Voting Rights Act, and people from the 1950s. Lawyers would admit they would go into a community, defend the case, even if they won, leave the next day. They call it parachuting in and out. And the people who would remain there would still be beaten, tortured, and abused by the police. So this whole thing was, we have to really do a genuine partnership, and it's not, we are doing this on your behalf, but we're helping to facilitate and work together. So we make the UN accessible and understandable, and then sort of get out of their way as much as possible. And a lot of lawyers and professionals would get very concerned about this. Like, you can have, we had meetings where there were big fights on who's going to be a speaker, and you would have academics and the professional NGOs going, well, can we train her so she says the right things? And we're like, you don't need to train her. She's quite good at doing exactly what she needs to say and how she needs to say it. So there were amazing fights between grassroots and the national, and we tried to keep those fights, though, away from everyone else so it didn't tear apart the movement. So that did work out quite well. On modern forms of slavery, the issue there, of course, was most of the people who pick the food don't get a living wage at all. Most are illegal or migrants that are so-called illegal. And so all the intersectionality of rights was really important, in that there was nowhere to turn. And the the people that did the hiring would actually, be making more money. If you worked there, you would never ever make money because you'd have to pay for your housing. You'd have to pay for your food. You'd have to pay for, so the longer you worked, the more in debt you became. And so we had to then coordinate with college students, and we sort of did something like Amnesty did there with the picture of what would be your last meal. We actually said, where does your food come from? So they were able to organize to get a living wage, and that Burger King paid them what they deserved. So that was the success of that campaign, because before then they weren't getting a living wage, and then the Immokalee farm workers in Florida did succeed and get an increase based on their campaign and organizing that way. And so it was also in the South, so it's pretty easy to say this is what slavery looked like then, and we feel like we live in slavery now. In fact, we face abuse, and if illegal aid would come to help, we had cases on video with them pointing guns at them, saying, get off of our land, you can't be here. And we're here to meet our clients who are these farm workers, and they'd have more reprisals. So that was an important thing there. As far as diversity and immense size of the country and all those aspects, quickly, it's giant. And it's 50 states, and each state's different, each community's different. So our main thing was finding the common challenges and uniting people. So we would have national webinars with 800 people on them. We'd have follow-ups, but then we also knew, look, we don't connect well with older demographics. So UNA, those were the people that supported the UN in 1945, so now they're 80. So they would talk in nursing homes, they would connect that way. So UNA was that, but then now UNA knows it's old, so we then reached out to the youth with their Gen-UN, which is the new generation of UN. So we worked all the social media side with them. It was based on what they wanted. We sort of just made sure it worked with that. And then the other side on indigenous people's rights in UPR also links in with the diversity. And the main thing there was we work with indigenous peoples in partnership. So I was fortunate that I worked with indigenous at the UN for over a decade. So then we coordinated and worked together to make sure that the Indigenous Rights Platform was first and foremost. So that was something that most people wouldn't do, but I admit the U.S. Human Rights Network did a good job, and that they went by article. Let's say the review of the Human Rights Committee on the ICCPR, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, they started with Indigenous first, right of self-determination, and Indigenous spoke first. So even Hawaii, trying to talk about independence, spoke before Guantanamo Bay, NSA surveillance, drone killing, and a lot of other issues. But they were principled to say we'd go by the articles, and Article 1 is self-determination, so indigenous peoples go first. Also, that's one of our successes. The United States was the last country to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and we were able to get the U.S. to adopt it between the consideration and the adoption, so that when the U.S. came for the adoption in the first cycle, they were like, we're here and we're pleased to say that based on your recommendations, we've now adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And as far as social media goes, I don't know if you could just look up Josh Cooper, or there was just an article on Sunday, if we could do that. And so social media side, and I understand the point that maybe not everyone has it, but the point was more people are using that, and it was, if you went into a real poor community, you'd be like, oh, let's not, maybe they would have the cell phones, they'd make videos that were phenomenal. So it wasn't as much, but I would say I would do, street theater, if that's popular with your community. I would do UPR with what fits there. And so for youth in America, look, I mean, anywhere you go now, they have selfie sticks. Everyone loves looking at how they look, everybody wants to get noticed. So what we did was like, all right, you're doing selfies. I'm not going to fight you. Let's do selfies with substance. And then within a day, we'd have like 100 selfies. And then everybody would be like, oh my God. But at least they're holding signs and messages, and they're reading the recommendations to know what they are. So, we're sort of co-opting the selfie society to be socially conscious. And so we did that. And So we really looked at what was popular and what people were doing. And we had hip hop, we had concerts. At the concerts, we worked with Trombone Shorty. He would make announcements in the middle of the show. He would say, let me bring up my good friend Josh. And so you go up on the stage, everybody's like, who the hell are you? And so you learn, like, you have to talk quick. You don't do like, hi, I'm here with the Universal Periodic Review, and I really think it's essential. No, you got to, like, wherever you're at, you talk how everyone else talks. We'll be like, we're here at the festival, but we're here for freedom. And they'll be like, woo, are you here? Yeah. And so you work with what you're with. You can't think everyone speaks your language, so you have to speak many languages. And I learned that a lot because I had to go around the whole country. And so I'd say the last thing was there's 3 big conferences in our country. The Green Festival. So they put me on the main stage of the Green Festival, but they put me, because they realized I was there, like, we'll put you on, but they put me under the founder's name. So everybody's like, where's Kevin? And I'm like, Kevin's not here, but I'm here to share with you a really important message. And they're like, we want to hear Kevin. Kevin supports this. And in the end, they're like, yeah, environment's a human right, da da da. But at the first 10 minutes, they were like, what does human rights have to do with the environment at a green festival? So you're like, okay, I've got to convince the environmental movement they're human rights activists. So that worked. At the social forum, that's like the most socialist, radical revolution groups. So you can't be like, law is a very important tool that we will mobilize. You're like, power to the people, and this is what we're doing. And they'd be like, yeah. And so we had to do everything along all those ways. And I'd say the final one was the U.S. Social Forum. And that is so poorly organized. So you're sitting in little kids' chairs in the bottom of a church for like 12-year-olds. And you're like, all right, these are what we're doing. But with everything we did, we had 3 actions you can do. So if you were academic, you would do this. The other thing is petitions. Everybody loves moveon.org and all those kind of things. People love writing petitions and love getting signatures. So we have petition junkies or whores, you would call them. They just love making petitions. And in the White House, we have a thing called We the People. So if you get that certain number of petitions, then you get a meeting with the administration and the president. So we had one of our issues get that many signatures, 300,000. So then we had a meeting about, and we were able to bring in UPR. So you really just do anything and everything possible based on what's popular in your country. So like if I go to Moldova, I don't go there saying, this is what you have to do. I walk around Moldova, see what's going on, see what people are doing, and then go, how about this? And how about that? And how about everyone's at this cafe called Tokenau? Can we get Tokenau to give us free coupons if you do a political action? You know, or what can we do? And then you just work with where you're at. If you try to bring something in from outside, it won't work.
It's blocked.
Okay, and then the last thing I was going to show you was, you know, as far as writing articles, you look for a good hook. And so for the United, it's there.
Yeah, but I have to get rid of this.
So for, obviously, America is not like really excited about the UN. The Republicans, whenever you can see with the Republican debates, anytime Republicans need to raise funds, you just talk about the UN and then you raise $1 million just to hate the UN. So you got this hard thing where no one knows what the UN really is. They don't know anything. So our angle was on Sunday, it was the 70th anniversary. So I called up the editorial page desk and I said, hey, aloha, how are you doing? Did you know it's the 70th anniversary of the United Nations? And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, can I write an editorial? And all she said was, if you write an editorial, you've got to say why the UN is relevant to our community. So you have to link global to grassroots and make it that way. So, and they only give you 600 words. So unfortunately, when you write these things, you can't control it in the sense you don't write it longer than they say because they'll cut your most important piece probably in your mind. So you just make it exactly what the word count is. And then we put all the local angles of, and I once again plugged in the UPR and Sustainable Development Goals in this thing that's talking about 70. So it was quoting Roosevelt's, since it's that. So you play that case, it's patriotic. You know, you throw in why is the U.S. important and how do they contribute, and more importantly, how can we be a leader? But then more importantly, what people need to do if they really think the UN's valuable. So as far as articles go, if that's your job, then I would generate a letter to the editor format that you could then get people to say the same points, but add their own story to talk about why that point's important. So I didn't show those because our internet's not so hot, but on top of selfies with substance, we had people to say, I support recommendation number, if this recommendation was realized, this is how it'd make my life better. And so those testimonials were really powerful too, because someone would be like, I'm gay, I can't get married, da-da-da-da, and then they'd be like, boom. And I mean, we had a lot of activities where on prison reform and things like that, Obama did maybe 4 actions that were all based on our UPR. So no American president ever visited a federal prison. So he went to the prisons in between consideration and adoption. They have something called conversion therapy in the churches. So if you're LGBTQIA and you see a picture of someone that you would find attractive, you'd get shocked, and they would try to convert you to not be gay. So we got the president to do an executive order against that and to put pressure on states to punish churches doing those things. So we actually had at least 6 results from our UPR at the time of adoption. So there's just more of what we can do. So that's our local newspaper. So I think local newspaper is important, local media is important, and we just tried our best to do those things. And I don't think the article's that short. I didn't just...
Yeah, but there's a login, and I don't have
there you go. So we have more there underneath. So those are responses to those questions. So, and I could continue sharing those, but it wasn't our main thing, but it's just to try to give an example of social media and different ways that we participated in and what we're able to accomplish. And there those 2 happy students are again with theirs. And that's about it. But none of us were really great at it, you know. People would start teasing. I never used Twitter. And now when I tweet, everybody's like, you have 200 followers. How'd you get that in overnight? And, you know, you 140 characters is pretty limiting. So, but we do that. But now, as Eve said, it is Instagram and it's Snapchat and everything else. So I think it's a powerful tool, but I don't think it's everything. But if you're ignoring social media and what the youth use these days, and you think you're going to speak for the youth and get the next generation involved in human rights, you're kidding yourself, you know, and just have to be aware if everybody loves taking pictures of themselves, then at least have them take pictures of themselves for a reason, not just because they're cute or, you know, the hair's looking good that day or the outfit. Make sure they know that it's what they believe, not what they look like that matters. So we kind of work that in too. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Bien, alors sur ces questions, juste pour que ce soit très clair, il n'est pas du tout dans notre intention de promouvoir un instrument en particulier du point de vue de la communication. Et les remarques qui ont été faites sur le fait qu'un certain nombre d'entre vous travaillent dans des communautés où justement il n'y aura par exemple pas d'électricité est effectivement tout ce qu'il y a de plus pertinent. Et évidemment, vous avez besoin d'un autre moyen. La question, je reviens toujours, ce sera vraiment le leitmotiv de la journée, c'est que c'est lié à la stratégie que vous allez employer et comment est-ce qu'un certain nombre de moyens de communication vont être utiles. Toute la communication n'est pas uniquement à destination de votre propre communauté. Il est évident que dans les communautés dans lesquelles vous vivez et vous travaillez, vous savez beaucoup mieux que quiconque comment contacter les gens, quels vont être les bons moyens. Ça peut être sur les marchés, ça peut être vraiment de toute autre technique qui n'ont rien à voir avec ce qu'on peut vous présenter ici. Par contre, si je reprends, juste pour prendre, parce que la question était tout à fait pertinente de Yogita, ce qui est intéressant dans l'exemple qui a été présenté par Josh, c'est que, et je crois que vos questions l'ont démontré, c'est que tout à coup, à travers ces quelques petits exemples, vous avez vous-même découvert des éléments de la réalité d'Amérique du Nord, et tout à coup vous avez dit « Ah, mais vous avez ça comme question, j'y avais jamais pensé que ça c'était un problème que vous aviez de cette manière-là ». Les diplomates qui vont devoir faire rédiger des recommandations sur vos pays, ils sont exactement dans la même situation, d'accord ? Ils sont basés ici à Genève pendant 2-3 ans. Ils ont travaillé juste avant à New York, ou ils ont travaillé, je ne sais pas, moi, à Singapour, ailleurs. Ils vont arriver à Genève pendant 2-3 ans. Dans le travail qu'ils ont à y faire ici, ils vont notamment devoir préparer des recommandations sur des pays dont ils se demandent, il est déjà où sur la carte ? Parce qu'évidemment, ils y passent tous, c'est universel. Donc il est évident que vous allez devoir travailler sur des pays dont vous ignorez tout de la réalité. On ne connaît pas tous les uns les autres. On s'amuse à faire un concours ici pour savoir si on connaît bien correctement la réalité sociale et politique de chacun des 176, 176 ou des 190 ou 190 États qui sont membres de l'ONU, par définition. Si on reprend par exemple le cas du Népal, il est possible que le débat, le type de stratégie que l'on pourrait prendre, ou pour un débat de ce genre, n'est pas uniquement par rapport à ce qui passait au Népal, mais peut-être de se dire, tiens, suite à un certain nombre des problèmes que l'on a ici, comme on sait que les femmes dans les collines, ou dans les montagnes, pardon, surtout pour le Népal, c'est pas des collines, c'est vraiment des montagnes, que les femmes qui sont dans tel ou tel endroit et qui sont confrontées à telle réalité, on veut le faire bien comprendre. Est-ce que quelqu'un, dans le village là-bas, on en connaît un, on a un militant, est-ce qu'il peut nous faire 2 minutes, avec son téléphone portable? Et ensuite, on le mettra sur un site web, soit qu'on gère à Katmandou, soit qu'on gère ailleurs. On va le demander, je sais pas, au Service international des droits de l'homme ici à Genève ou autre, d'avoir ça. Ce qui fait qu'après, on peut toujours dire aux ambassades qui sont ici, sur ce qui va se passer sur le Népal, allez voir le site en tel, vous allez voir 3, 4, 5 témoignages. Dites-leur à vos collègues qui sont eux dans le pays s'ils trouvent que c'est juste, etc., etc. Ça aurait été juste 3, 4 minutes qui vont venir ça ne veut pas dire que vous ne faites pas et le communiqué de presse et le rapport et autres, hein. C'est en plus. Mais ça va donner un certain poids au type de problème que vous voulez avoir. Ça peut aussi lancer des débats chez vous. Ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'on s'est rendu compte que ce genre de technique a mobilisé des gens qui tout à coup vont obliger l'ambassadeur, parce que l'ambassadeur en question, c'est l'ambassadeur qui est ici à Genève. Donc l'ambassadeur américain qui est ici à Genève a répondu à des collégiens ou des jeunes universitaires, des jeunes étudiants universitaires qui ont envoyé des messages aux États-Unis. Ça veut dire que tout ça, ça va être aussi vérifié au passage par le secrétariat d'État, c'est-à-dire le ministère des Affaires étrangères américain. Tout ça, c'est autant de techniques qu'on peut ajouter. Hein. Et donc, par exemple, l'utilisation que vous feriez dans votre cas, ça va être inutile pour ce que vous faites sur votre terrain à vous, par exemple en RDC, où s'il n'y a même pas d'eau, on peut imaginer qu'il n'y a même pas d'électricité. Par contre, le fait de faire connaître cette réalité, d'avoir une femme qui va témoigner ou un homme qui va témoigner de telle ou telle réalité, bon, ça va donner quelque chose de tout à fait concret. Et le fait de faire circuler ça, même à travers des mails, parce que si ça dure 1 ou 2 minutes, on peut même l'envoyer aux ambassades avec des mails. Aux ambassades les plus intéressées. Vous voyez, une ONG ici, peut-être pas vous depuis chez vous parce que c'est plus compliqué, mais une ONG ici peut dire, je vais sélectionner 10 États qui me paraissent intéressants, je les connais, hop, je leur envoie ça. Vous avez de fortes chances que sur les 10, il y en aura 5 ou 6 diplomates qui vont regarder c'était quoi la petite vidéo. Si elle dure 2 minutes, je jette un coup d'œil. Si j'en ai pour 20 minutes, non, j'ai pas le temps, je mets ça sur plus tard. Et en fait, je la verrai jamais parce que j'oublie. Mais si c'est juste 2 minutes, j'ouvre le message, hop, je peux jeter un coup d'œil. Vous voyez, c'est ça, ce genre de petites choses qui va venir s'ajouter, se remettre en plus dans les... Donc, ces instruments... Je reviens toujours à ma question de base, c'est des questions de stratégie, et après vous réfléchissez quels moyens de communication vous utilisez pour avec les gens avec qui vous travaillez, en fonction de ce qui vous intéresse. Ça peut être utile pour votre propre réalité, ça peut être utile en fait des fois presque comme un prétexte. Ce que l'on voit aussi avec ce qu'a présenté Josh, une partie, c'est purement un prétexte. Ça montre simplement qu'en fait, en faisant ça, des gens se sont mobilisés, se sont intéressés, ont fait un travail, et ils étaient très contents de pouvoir ensuite se voir eux-mêmes sur la photo et de pouvoir le montrer à d'autres. Le résultat, c'est pas la photo, c'est pas le fait que ce soit publié, en réalité, c'est le fait qu'ils aient travaillé dessus. Et que ça a eu tout un effet comme ça de réseau à l'intérieur même du terrain. Donc vous voyez, là on a des modes d'instrumentalisation et d'utilisation qui sont extrêmement différents. Et je reviens à ma question de stratégie. Alors en sachant, c'est vrai aussi, on a toujours des surprises. C'est-à-dire qu'on fait une stratégie de communication, on pense que ça va être comme ça, puis après les gens détournent l'instrument, puis ils en font autre chose, auquel on n'avait soi-même pas du tout pensé. Ça, c'est les aléas et même les joies de ce genre de travail en matière de communication. On se fait toujours un petit peu avoir, ça ne marche jamais exactement comme on l'avait pensé. Mais au départ, c'est utile d'avoir une véritable stratégie où on sait ce que l'on veut. Ensuite, on essaie de voir quels sont les instruments que l'on peut utiliser et on démarre sur cette base. Bien, la présentation de Josh a été très, très substantielle. Je pense que le débat qu'on a eu ici était tout à fait intéressant. On va reprendre certains de ces éléments juste après la pause, en introduction du workshop. Et encore une fois, merci à Josh pour cette présentation assez complète du travail qui a été fait aux États-Unis pour le dernier EPU. You've taken the whole of the time. I didn't have the time to put my